Hello, students. For the last part of this book, I'm not going to be telling you who's doing the narrating, whether it's coming from the journal or it's Seaman's point of view, or it is a retelling of their experience from Drouillard and Coulter. I want you to figure that out. I'll pause, though, in between the changes. We are starting on page 271. July 20th, 1806. Very few trees. We walked along the top of the bluff, which was nearly 200 feet above the river, made 28 miles. July 22nd, 1806. After 29 miles, we arrived at a grove of cottonwood in the river bottom. I can see 20 miles ahead to the foot of the Rocky Mountains. We will camp here so I can make the necessary observations with my instruments. The game here is very shy, an indication that there are Indians in the vicinity hunting them. July 26, 1806. We have met a group of Blackfeet Indians. Coulter closes the red book. That's all the captain wrote. He looks at Drouillard. But that's not the end of the story, Drouillard says. It's clear that Mountain Dog, Wakawis, and the others all wanted to hear what happened when we met the Blackfeet. We had gone as far up Maria's River as Captain Lewis wanted. We had just turned south and were heading back across the prairie toward the Great Falls, Drouillard begins. Drouillard was riding along the bank of a small river hunting, and we were above him walking on the prairie. We had climbed a hill above the river and stopped to look around. Horses, Captain Lewis said, about a mile distant. Joe Fields followed the captain's gaze. Sure enough, a whole herd of them. The captain took his eagle eye out for a closer look. Indians, he said, but I don't think they see us yet. They seem to be looking down at the river bottom. Drouillard, Reuben said. The captain frowned. There are at least 30 horses. If there are as many Indians, we may be in for an unpleasant time, gentlemen. Blackfeet? Reuben asked. That's my assumption, Private. And it looks like a couple of them are carrying rifles. We can't leave Drouillard down there. We'll try to make the best out of this situation, Joe. Get that flag out. Let's see if we can get their attention off our friend in the river bottom. It worked. One of the Blackfeet saw the flag and whipped his horse forward in our direction. Captain Lewis calmly climbed off his horse and stood waiting for the Blackfeet's approach. The brave was disconcerted by the captain's reaction to the charge and brought his horse to a stop 100 paces away. Captain Lewis held his hand out to him, and the brave wheeled his horse around and galloped back to the others. I only count 8 of them, Joe said, greatly relieved. The Blackfeet were mere boys, younger than Mountain Dog and his friends. But there may be more. The captain climbed back up on his horse. Several of the horses have saddles on them. We'll walk up to them, but if there is trouble, I plan to resist to my dying breath. We're with you, Captain, the Fields brothers said in unison. When we got within a few paces, the captain had the brothers stop. He approached the boy who had charged us alone. When the captain got up to him, he put his hand out again. This time, the boy shook it. Joe and Reuben let out long breaths of pure relief and rode up behind the captain. With poor hand talk, the captain explained that the man in the river bottom was with us and suggested that Reuben and one of the Blackfeet ride down and bring him up. I was pretty surprised when Reuben rode up to me with an Indian behind him, Drouillard explains. When we got to the top, we were met by Captain Lewis and the others. The sun was just going down, and Captain said that he had invited the Blackfeet to camp with us. Before we met Drouillard, the captain had given the Blackfeet the medals he had with him, a handkerchief and the flag. We found a good spot to camp at the bend in the river. The Blackfeet made a domed shelter out of sticks, threw some tan buffalo hides over it, then invited the captain inside for a parley. Drouillard did the hand talking. They said they were from a large band of Blackfeet about a day's march away. They also told us that another band of Blackfeet was out hunting buffalo and would arrive at the mouth of Maria's River in a few days, which was not welcome news, as our men were near the mouth getting the pirogue and our supplies ready to go down the Missouri. The talk lasted late into the night. Captain Lewis gave his speech about their great white father and told them that it would be to their tribe's advantage to cooperate with us. He asked them where they had gotten their muskets. They told him they had traded furs for them at the British fort to the north. Ask them if they'll come with us to the mouth of the Marias River, the captain told Drouillard. Ask if a couple of them would like to go with us even farther, to St. Louis. Drouillard made the signs, but the boys didn't respond. We got their answer the next morning. Captain Lewis was afraid the Blackfeet might try to steal our horses during the night. We were all exhausted, and the Fields brothers had the late sentry duty. I lay down next to the captain, closed my eyes, and didn't open them until I heard Drouillard shout, "Darn you! Let go of my gun!" It was just dawn. Drouillard was in a tug-of-war with the Blackfeet, who had his rifle. Captain Lewis jumped up and reached for his rifle, but found it gone. We saw one of the Blackfeet boys running away with it. The captain pulled the horse pistol out of his holster and ran after him. The boy stopped. Captain Lewis pointed the pistol at him and motioned for him to lay the rifle on the ground. The boy started to do so when the Fields brothers came running up with their rifles loaded and cocked. "Don't shoot them!" Captain Lewis shouted at them. The boy dropped Captain Lewis's rifle and ran. As Captain Lewis retrieved it, the Fields brothers explained that a Blackfeet had stolen their rifles when they weren't looking. "We chased after the Indian who took our rifles," Reuben said. "I pulled my knife on him and stabbed him in the heart. He's lying dead right over there." For a moment, the man and I were stunned. We had been traveling for months through Indian territory, and there had been some tense moments, but none before this had led to a death. Then I noticed the Blackfeet were trying to scatter our horses. I started barking. "The horses!" Captain Lewis shouted. "Go after them, boys. We're dead if they get our mounts." Captain Lewis and I ran after the two Indians driving the horses upriver. The Fields brothers and Drouillard ran after the others who were driving the horses downriver. We chased the Indians nearly 300 yards until they reached the vertical wall of the bluff. They ran the horses into a small alcove and tried to take cover behind a pile of rocks. In front of the alcove, one of them had an old musket with him. We couldn't see if the second boy was armed or not. "Let our horses go!" Captain Lewis shouted. The Blackfeet didn't move or say a word. Captain Lewis shouldered his rifle, aimed, and fired, wounding the boy in the belly. The boy fell over, but got right back up and fired at Captain Lewis. The ball missed. In his hurry, the captain had left his shot pouch back at camp and could not reload. "Let's go, see." Captain Lewis and I ran back to camp. Drouillard was there with 4 horses. The Fields brothers came back with 4 more. While the men saddled the horses, Captain Lewis threw everything he could find that belonged to the Blackfeet into the fire. "We've got some hard riding to do, gentlemen," he said. "When word of this gets to the other Blackfeet bands, they are going to seek revenge. We need to get to the mouth of Maria's River and warn the other men." They rode off. For the first couple hours, I was able to keep up with them, but then I started to fall behind. "We rode all day and half the night," Drouillard says. "We stopped briefly to let the horses graze late that afternoon. After we rested for a bit, we got back on our horses and rode until dark, figuring we had gotten about 80 miles away from the Blackfeet. We shot a buffalo and ate, then started out again and rode until 2 in the morning. We rode 100 miles in less than 20 hours. "And the dog?" Wacquees asks. Drouillard looks at me. "We kind of lost track of him, didn't really notice he wasn't with us until we stopped that afternoon. We weren't overly concerned. C was a good tracker, and we thought he'd be able to find us. We couldn't go back for him, that's for certain. We had our men on the river to think about. Captain Lewis was confident C would catch up to us. He always had in the past." My leg was bothering me, and it was impossible for me to keep up with the horses. It was dark by the time I had reached the place they had let the horses graze. By the scent, I knew the men were a good 4 or 5 hours ahead of me. If I had kept going, I might have been able to catch them by morning, but I was too tired to continue. And like Captain Lewis, I was sure I would catch up eventually. I slept. Captain Lewis woke us up at sunrise, Drouillard continues. "I'd never been more sore in my life. I thought we had another full day of riding in front of us, but we reached the river after a dozen miles. We headed down a ways and ran right into our men paddling the canoes and pirogue downriver. We took our bags off the horses, put them in the boats, and floated down the mouth of Marias River. When we got there, we quickly checked the caches we had left the previous year. Most of the supplies were ruined by water, but we took what we could and left in an awful hurry. I was up at sunrise too, with my leg hurting worse than it had the day before. I limped along, following the men's track throughout the day, stopping briefly to feed on the buffalo they had shot the previous evening. Wolves had been at the carcass, but had moved on by the time I arrived. After my meal, I continued following the captain's trail. It was well after dark when I reached the point where he had gotten to the Missouri. I slept again. The next morning, I followed the river down to the mouth of Marias River. When I saw the open caches, I figured the men had gone on without me. If they had, they were running with the current now, and catching up to them would not be easy. But I was going to try. I had started sniffing around the caches for something to eat when I came across the captain's knapsack. The captain must have forgotten it in his rush to leave. It was open. The only things inside were a bottle of ink and the red book. I pulled the book out, knowing the captain would want it, and I had just started heading downriver when I heard horses coming up behind me fast. It was a large band of the Blackfeet. I ran. A couple of them broke off from the band and pursued me. As I had so many times before, I jumped into the river to escape, holding the red book above the water so it would not get damaged. About halfway across, I felt a searing pain in my front shoulder. I glanced down and saw an arrow sticking out of it. I continued to swim as best I could and finally reached the opposite shore. Another arrow came my way, but it missed. With the river between me and the Blackfeet, I was safe. They weren't about to get wet chasing a dog. I pulled the arrow out with my teeth, which was the most painful thing I had ever done. Exhausted and hurt, I crawled under some bushes and went to sleep. I don't know how long I lay there, but it had to be days. I didn't even have the strength to get up and walk the river for a drink. I thought of Captain Lewis and the men and knew I would never see them again. I grew weaker and weaker. I wanted to die. Caw, caw, caw. When I heard that sound, I used the last of my strength to crawl out from under the bush, and there was Mountain Dog. His horse was still wet from the crossing. Yaka? He ran over to me and looked at the wound in my shoulder. So this is where the crow was leading me. Caw, caw, caw. Mountain Dog turned and looked up at the crow with a white feather on his wing. He had found his Waiakin, and his Waiakin had found me. We met the rest of our party where the Yellowstone and Missouri meet, Juilliard continues. From there, we proceeded on to St. Louis, arriving there in September 1806. And I guess that's just about it. Now tell us, Watkawis, how you got a hold of Captain's journal. Watkawis smiles. If you take a close look at the cover, perhaps you can tell me. Juilliard holds the red book close to the fire and examines the cover. Teeth marks? He looks over at me. My Waiakin led me to Yaka, Mountain Dog says. When I crossed the river, Yaka crawled out from beneath a bush with an arrow wound in his shoulder. Under the bush where he had lain was the red book. Mountain Dog brought me food and water and treated my wound. After 2 days, I was able to stand. After a week, I could walk to the river and get a drink for myself. The evening before we left, White Feather appeared in a tree above our campfire and stayed there all night. The next morning, he led us home. In the morning, my old friends pack their horses. Coulter gets to his knees in front of me and takes a handful of fur on either side of my face. He looks into my eyes and bugles like a bull elk looking for a cow. Guess this is it, see, he says. Unless you want to come with us. I am sorely tempted. Not a day has gone by that I haven't thought of Captain Lewis and the rambles we took and the things we saw. I've thought of the men and wondered what paths they have followed. I could go with them. Mountain Dog would understand. But I feel my place is here with my new tribe. I watched Coulter and Juilliard ride east across the flat prairie until I can no longer see them. And that's the end of the story. I'm going to read the author's note to you, however, because I think it's a good ending as well. As I write this, the author, by the way, is Roland Smith, and here is his words. As I write this, I am flying 35,000 feet above the Great Plains, not far from where the Corps of Discovery passed nearly 2 centuries ago. The grass sea has been replaced by a patchwork of farms. The wild rivers the men struggled against have been tamed by dams to create power for the cities and towns built in the wake of their exploration. Sadly, most of the buffalo and wolves are gone. So too are most of the Native Americans who helped the explorers by providing food, advice, and guidance almost every step of the way. The captains could not have imagined me flying above them in a jet, crossing the continent in a few hours, nor could they have imagined a nation covered with paved highways for automobiles or trains or telephones or computers. In their time, nothing traveled faster than a horse, and yet the captains were considered modern men. They were equipped with the latest technology of their day: compasses, a chronometer, a sextant, spyglasses, and perhaps most important, pens, ink, and paper. The men of the Corps of Discovery could not see into the future, but we can see into the past because they left us wonderfully detailed journals describing their remarkable journey. I relied heavily on these journals to write The Captain's Dog, but I also used my imagination freely to fill in events that might have happened to give the reader a fuller sense of what these men experienced. The idea for using seamen to tell this story came from my lifelong love and admiration for dogs and wolves. As a biologist, I spent more than 20 years working with canines in the field and in captivity. Every time I came across Seaman's name in one of the journals, I found myself wondering what he thought of the incidents the captains and the other men described. It wasn't long before my imagination translated Seaman's responses into the words that tell this story. Dogs spend more time watching us than we do watching them. As a result, I believe they know a great deal more about us than we know about them. A dog sees, hears, and smells things we cannot dream of perceiving. Who better to tell this story than the captain's extraordinary dog? As I studied the Lewis and Clark journals and those of the other men, I found myself wishing I could travel back in time and join Seaman for a day or two. I would give just about anything to see a buffalo herd so vast it takes a day to amble by us, or deer and elk so numerous and unafraid I have to toss sticks at them to get them out of our way, or a pack of gray wolves hunting in broad daylight without the slightest fear of humans. If I had a time machine, the first trip I'd take would be back to June 14th, 1805, and join Seaman the day after he and Captain Lewis found the Great Falls. This was the day they were chased by the grizzly, harassed by the wolverine, and charged by the bull buffalo. What a day that was. My second trip would be back to August 17th, 1805, when Bird Woman discovered that her brother Cameawait was alive. Perhaps 200 years from now, we will have time machines and the ability to travel back to witness the great events of history for ourselves. Until then, we have books and our imaginations. Where will you go next? This has been a great story, and that was written by Roland Smith on March the 19th, 1999, as he flew above the Great Plains. I am going to have a final assignment for you, and I will post that later. Bye.